Lady Diana Spencer was plucked from the obscure ranks of the British aristocracy and became a fairy tale princess. Then suddenly, in August 1997, Diana's life came to an end. The world stood still as news of Diana's car crash reverberated around the world's media. But what the official history books will not tell you is that on the very day of that fateful crash in Paris, rumours circulated that Diana had been assassinated by British military intelligence or the American CIA. In this film, we show you for the first time the true history of the British royal family, whose ancestors have stabbed and slashed their way to power throughout the ages. You'll see how Diana was bred from birth for her role to serve the royal family, and how Prince Charles callously continued his love affair with Camilla Parker Bowles throughout his marriage to Diana, and how Diana had to search her apartment in Kensington Palace for listening devices placed by MI5, who then distributed secretly taped and edited private phone conversations to the media in order to discredit Diana's public image. For the first time, we reveal details of the bungled attempt by MI5 to murder Camilla Parker Bowles just weeks before Diana's car crash in Paris. We also exclusively reveal that the black Mercedes carrying Princess Diana had previously been stolen at gunpoint, and that the engine management microchip had been replaced so that the car could be controlled remotely. We also interview the authors of a new book, Diana: The Hidden Evidence, which reveals that MI5 and MI6 officers had advance warning of the crash which killed Princess Diana, her companion Dodi Al-Fayed, and the driver Henri Paul. Join us now on a quest for the truth, and find out how Diana, Princess of Wales, was murdered by the monarchy. Throughout the centuries, the British royal family have had a passion for murder and a fascination with the occult. Whilst innocent country folk were persecuted for devil worship in medieval Britain, the royal family played host to astrologers, alchemists and magicians such as John Dee, Francis Bacon and Isaac Newton. To this day, the British royal family patronise various secret societies such as Freemasonry and the Order of the Garter. Freemasonry is a global cult which forces members to reenact murder, undergo a mock funeral, and requires all who take part to swear blood-curdling oaths of allegiance to the Masonic god Yabulon. Reverend John Lawrence wrote a book called Freemasonry, Is It a Religion? His conclusions were that Freemasonry is a cult which worships a tripantheon god, most definitely not the god of the Holy Bible. The Masonic god is inspired by the mythical spirit of Baal, the ancient devil. As a member of the royal family, Princess Diana was surrounded by Freemasons, Queen Elizabeth II is Grand Patroness of English Freemasonry, and the Duke of Edinburgh has been a Master Mason since 1952. Living under the same roof as Diana at Kensington Palace is Britain's most senior royal Freemason, the Duke of Kent. Seen here leading a grand Masonic ceremony, the Duke of Kent was installed as Grand Master of British Freemasonry by the Earl of Scarborough in 1964. Every Mason swears blood oaths of allegiance to his fellow brothers. A Mason must support his fellow brothers even if he is in full knowledge of wrongdoing by his brethren.
The dangers you have escaped are those of stabbing and strangling.
In every strata of British government, there are Masons who will carry out illegal duties, such as murder, on behalf of the royal family.
Your own death by stabbing, and the brother that held it would have remained firm and done his duty.
There are over 600,000 Masons in Britain today, many of them directly serving the royal family in the government, armed forces, and in the secret services. One of the most powerful factions within Freemasonry are the Knights of Malta. They wear the Maltese cross around their necks. As Diana was led up the aisle, she was entering a world dominated by Masonic tradition, of skullduggery, black magic, and murder. The ancestors of Prince Charles were often fascinated with witchcraft. King James I wrote an authoritative book on the subject called Demonologies. Prior to Henry VIII's reign, Jeanne of Navarre, widow of King Henry IV of England, was accused of having used witchcraft to seek the death of her stepson Henry V. Jeanne of Navarre was convicted without a trial, largely on evidence given by her chaplain. Some historians have suggested that Jeanne of Navarre was a member of a well-organized coven of witches based in the heart of the British royal family. To this very day, in the Royal Palace of Westminster, seat of Her Majesty's government, blood-curdling oaths and secret rituals are acted out by members of Parliament and the Queen's Privy Councillors at the new Welcome Masonic Lodge.
This is London. Following bulletin was issued at 9:25. The King's life is moving peacefully towards its close.
Well, I'll give you one example of how there's one law for the poor and no law for the rich, especially the royal family. Back in the late 1930s, the old King George, in his Jubilee year, he was very ill. And there is such a thing as euthanasia. And euthanasia is a technique of killing somebody. It's a mercy killing for somebody that's suffering from a life-threatening disease. And it's completely illegal in the United Kingdom if you were to kill somebody, you know, who requested that they wanted to die before some painful disease took hold of them. You would go to prison for murder, or at the very least you'd go to prison for manslaughter. The Queen asked Lord Dawson of Penn, the royal physician, to perform euthanasia, in other words, to kill the king before his illness took its natural course. Lord Dawson of Penn took a menu card and wrote a bulletin that was circulated to the BBC, which said that the king is naturally coming to the end of his life. That was an absolute, utter lie. What happened is that Lord Dawson of Penn filled 2 syringes, one syringe full of cocaine, and the other syringe was full of morphine, which is an opium. Morphine is very, very similar to heroin. And amazingly, instructed the nurse to inject King George with these 2 syringes into his jugular vein. The nurse refused. So Lord Dawson of Penn took these syringes and injected the king himself. Now this act of euthanasia, which is completely illegal within the United Kingdom, was timed so that the king was killed so that it would be announced in time for the morning papers the next day. And if any of us were to do that within the borders of the United Kingdom, we would be arrested and imprisoned for murder or manslaughter. And that's a good example of how there is one law for the poor and no law for the rich. The marriage was, you know, a marriage made in heaven as far as the media were concerned. The Sun newspaper, which was started by Rupert Murdoch, wasn't that old. In 1981, when the royal engagement was announced, by Rupert Murdoch wasn't that old. In 1981, when the royal engagement was announced, the Sun newspaper, I think, had only been in publication for about 20 odd years. And this whole phenomenon of tabloid newspapers, tabloid radio, tabloid television hadn't really been around for longer than, I think, 20, 25 years in Britain. And so Diana, unfortunately for her, became the target for these rather sort of oixum hooligan type photographers. That kind of journalism, I mean, you can't even really call that any, you can't, that's not journalism at all. In actual fact, these men who work for the tabloid press, who hounded Diana, you couldn't even describe these people as serious photographers. What I consider a photographer is somebody like Yves Bertrand, the French photographer who does these amazing aerial photographs of different places on planet Earth. These people are more or less like hunters, except without guns. They have cameras. Though I have to say that some of the cameras with the giant long lenses do look like shotguns. And Diana was a teenager when she came into the situation, and there was several instances where the press had actually driven her to tears. While the early years of the Charles and Di marriage are going on, it's very, very interesting because Prince Philip made, quite a few politically incorrect remarks, which I'm sure many of us know about. Allegedly, he described Chinese people as slitty-eyed bastards during a state visit. I believe it was to the Great Wall of China. Allegedly, he also really complained about the quality of gravy to some state banquet and described it as washing up water. Allegedly, he was also asked what would he like to come back on Earth as if he was reincarnated, and he said, "I'd like to be reincarnated." This is allegedly what he said, as a bacteria that would wipe out a large proportion of the Earth's population. Prince Philip is not Greek. That is a complete fallacy. His family are actually German. And his sisters are completely and utterly out of the royal limelight right from the first day that he comes into the public eye in the 1950s, late 1940s, early 1950s. And his sisters married senior Nazis. Now, Prince Philip was the subject of a documentary which was broadcast 4 years ago on Channel 4 television in Great Britain. And he was a playboy, a classic royal playboy. And this documentary portrayed him as going to, sort of the jet set sort of parties of that era. And he was friendly with Stephen Ward. Now, Stephen Ward was a gentleman in, the sort of swinging 60s who used to procure rather attractive young ladies for escorting members of the aristocracy to parties, cocktail evenings, dances, and this kind of thing. One of the young ladies that Stephen Ward procured for one of his friends was a lady called Christine Keeler. And Christine Keeler had an affair with the Labour Minister of War at the same time as also bed-hopping with a senior Russian military officer. And this is right in the middle of the Cold War. And John Profumo, the minister who'd had this, affair with Christine Keeler, resigned and came under intense media scrutiny. And Prince Philip knew Stephen Ward. And Stephen Ward was the man who was responsible for procuring the services of Christine Keeler for John Profumo. And in actual fact, at the time when all of this came out, and obviously being a pimp and prostitution was illegal, the time that this all came into the public eye, there was an exhibition in London of sketches which had been done by Stephen Ward, who was an artist. They were sketches which had been done at Buckingham Palace of members of the royal family, which proves that Stephen Ward, this society pimp, if you like, was very well connected with the royal family and with other people working at Buckingham Palace. And there is a sketch by Stephen Ward. I mean, Stephen Ward was an excellent artist, and it is of Prince Philip. and they were friends, and that is absolutely for sure. So with the newspapers going to town and being extremely interested in the extramarital activities of John Profumo, and trying to piece together the actual story of all of these high society parties with these working class call girls being brought in by Stephen Ward, the royal family obviously panicked. They didn't want anything to do at all with Stephen Ward, who'd been arrested and was in the dock for racketeering, pimping prostitutes. So they sent Anthony Blunt, who is the Queen's nephew and the curator of the Queen's private art collection, down to the gallery that was exhibiting the sketches by Stephen Ward, and gave Anthony Blunt all of the money to buy those sketches. Now, what's really an eye-opener is that Anthony Blunt was a KGB agent, and he was later outed as such, and he was loyal to Lenin and Leninists, and he was a Trotskyite, and he was actually a mole inside Buckingham Palace, feeding information about the royal family back to the communists in Russia. What transpired is that rather conveniently Stephen Ward committed suicide. Now what's transpired in recent years is that we've now found out that Stephen Ward was not only friends with the royal family, he was an occultist and he was interested in black magic. And for part of his life he was living in a small cottage on a private estate called the Cliveden Estate, which is owned by the Astor family, who are a very, very well-to-do, well-established branch of the British aristocracy. And after Stephen Ward's death, I mean, I won't call it suicide because I think that Stephen Ward was killed in order to stop the Profumo affair from getting any more dangerous for the royal family. After Stephen Ward's death, the Astor family actually paid a Catholic priest to visit the cottage where Stephen Ward had lived. And the reason they did that is because there was ghost activity there. Apparently there'd been lots of seances and rituals done there as part of these high society gatherings. And as anybody who has experimented with the Ouija board knows, if you don't do the whole thing properly and put the spirits to sleep, they hang around. And the cottage that Stephen Ward had occupied on the Cliveden estate had become haunted. And the Catholic priest made a comment, which is on record, and he said that the dark forces, the spiritual black forces that he encountered during the exorcism were the darkest, most powerful forces that he had ever experienced in all of his years working as an exorcist. Our investigation into the death of Princess Diana starts here, at Eltham Palace, known as the Secret Palace, just a few miles from central London. This is where the young Henry VIII grew up, and several centuries later, when the palace was occupied by the wealthy Courtaulds family, Eltham Palace became the headquarters of an organisation which evolved into what we now call MI6, Overseas British Military Intelligence. This is the oldest bridge in London. It was here on the banks of the moat that Henry VIII composed his famous song, Greensleeves. Henry VIII is also remembered for having 6 wives, but what he is least remembered for is being a murderer. Henry VIII ordered the execution of his wife, Anne Boleyn, simply because she had not bared him a son. Anne was imprisoned and beheaded before a court of nobility at the Tower of London. Henry also ordered the execution of several men who he falsely claimed had committed adultery with Anne. Anne's daughter succeeded the throne as Elizabeth I. In September 1560, 2 years into her reign, the 27-year-old Queen Elizabeth I was implicated in a suspected murder of Lady Robert Dudley, the wife of Lord Robert Dudley, who was Queen Elizabeth's secret lover. The coroner's jury returned a verdict of accidental death. Queen Elizabeth made Lord Dudley the Earl of Leicester, but they never married, for fear of the mass speculation and suspicions throughout Britain, causing them both to be accused of murder. On the 1st of February 1587, Queen Elizabeth I ordered the execution of her half-sister, Mary, Queen of Scots. However, Henry VIII and his daughter Elizabeth I were not the first murdering monarchs to occupy the royal throne. They were descended from a long aristocratic tradition of crowned killers who would often savour a passion for black magic. 80 years prior to Queen Elizabeth I's reign, in 1483, King Richard III commissioned Sir James Tyrrell to kill his nephews, the young Prince Edward and Prince Richard. In the dead of night, Sir James Tyrrell and 2 assistants smothered the young princes, thus ensuring the bloodline of Richard III became the new monarchy of Britain. Prior to King Richard murdering the 2 young princes, in 1477, the Duke of Clarence said that his brother, King Edward, practiced the... In 1477, the Duke of Clarence said that his brother, King Edward, practiced the black arts and used his knowledge of witchcraft to concoct poisons for the king's enemies. The Scottish King Macbeth was one of several early Scottish monarchs who were crowned killers. Many times, aided and abetted by sorcerers and witches, Scottish noblemen would kill a king, seize the throne for themselves, and then in turn meet with a violent death at the hands of another murdering monarch. In 1437, King James of Scotland was stabbed to death by a bunch of henchmen wielding swords and daggers. They were ordered to kill King James I by the Earl of Athol, who claimed he was the rightful King of Scotland. The king's son, James II, stabbed to death the 8th Earl of Douglas in 1452. The Earl was the biggest landowner in Scotland. 3 years after being murdered by the king, the Earl's land was annexed by the Crown Estates. Well, I knew at one point today that we were going to discuss the subject of treason. And what happens to people who are guilty of treason. Diana was most certainly a person who committed very, very serious treason. The Panorama interview that Martin Bashir did with Diana is one long treasonous offence. I think that if Diana had not committed treason, if she had not made that panorama documentary, then the chances are that she would still be alive to this day. Well, what I've done is I've brought along a few books today that are from my own personal collection. I've got a huge library. Some of my books go back to the medieval era, 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th century manuscripts and that kind of thing. And there is this whole notion that was suggested in David Icke's book, The Biggest Secret, which really portrays the crash in the tunnel as being the beginning of a whole ritual sacrifice of Diana. And of course, people that were guilty of treason were ritually sacrificed. And I made a film recently in my series of Illuminati films called Murdered by the Monarchy. And in that film you can see the terrible ritual killing of people who had their bodies cut into different pieces, and they used to cut the heart of the traitor out and put this on display publicly, and parts of the body of the traitor were distributed for various rituals amongst the aristocratic and royal nobility, the elite of Europe. And you know, people say to me, it's not true, is it, that royal people are involved in black magic? Well, I just laugh at that, because the whole of the European royal elite, the aristocratic, noble, political, leading elite of society throughout the whole of history have been involved in the occult. And so I've brought a few books along today to just illustrate some of the most notorious black magician type characters that have populated the ranks of royal families and the nobility and the aristocracy throughout the ages. So I think we just have a look at them here. This is the castle, the famous castle at Taufouge in France, which was previously the home of a very wealthy man called Gilles de Retz, or Gilles de Retz. Now, he was the Marshal of France, a very successful military career. He retired at an early age in his mid-20s, and he then took on the study of black magic in this castle. And he was a member of the nobility. He'd formerly assisted Joan of Arc in her campaigns against the British. And he performed black magic rituals in this castle with the help of an Italian priest called Preletti. And so many children were going missing wherever Gilles de Retz appeared, that eventually his black magic came under the scrutiny of the authorities, and he was eventually arrested, tortured, and executed. And he was executed on charges of taking no less than 150 children, though it's quite likely that he was responsible for the sacrifice, so the killing, and sadomasochistic black magic rituals with these children, probably in the number of thousands and thousands of children. And this kind of thing is still going on in France and Belgium and the United Kingdom amongst the nobility to this day. And we know this because there was a famous case in Belgium recently. A chap called Marc Dutroux was arrested, and he was found in possession of keys to dungeons which were located under houses in suburban areas in Belgium. And these children were kept imprisoned. They'd been snatched, and these children were just some of the literally millions of people that go missing every year. And Marc Dutroux's confession alleges that all he was doing was procuring children for sadomasochistic use by very, very wealthy people in Belgium. He claims that certain members of the European nobility were involved. And of course the word sadomasochism, or the term sadomasochism, sado is from the name of Sade, the Marquis de Sade, who's another member of the French nobility, and he used to get young girls from local villages and used to partake in sadomasochistic, horrible, evil kind of soirees. This is the famous Madame de Montespan, who was the mistress of King Louis XIV of France. Ms. Montespan actually hired a black magician to put a spell on the king's wife to ensure that the king's wife would never have any children. She was also the employer of a priest who used to perform black masses. This priest was called Abbé Guibourg, and he used to perform various black masses for members of nobility and perform sacrifices of children with a naked woman laying on the altar. And again we see this link between royalty and sacrifice. It's historically it's all there, except it's been swept under a very plush carpet. Well, Hampton Court Palace is one of the most haunted places, not only in Britain, but in the entire world. And it was the official palace, the official residence of the royal family. It was originally built in the 1200s, and then it was massively added to in the 1500s. And many famous royal people have had their homes at Hampton Court. Henry VIII is one, and Henry VIII was a psychopath. He was somebody that would fly into royal tempers, and he would decree that a certain person had committed adultery and therefore committed treason, and would behead them. Not a very nice chap at all, Henry VIII, even though he wrote a good piece of music called Greensleeves. Now, one of his wives that he accused of being adulterous and therefore being treasonous was a woman called Catherine Howard. And Catherine Howard realized as soon as that she had been accused of adultery, she knew that she was going to have her head cut off. So she ran to see the king to plead mercy for him, but she never made it because the palace guards arrested her and dragged her away. And still to this day, from time to time, you can hear the screams of the ghost of Catherine Howard, and she was dragged away through a part of the palace which is now called the Haunted Gallery. You know, there's no doubt that Hampton Court is most definitely infested with psychic activity and with ghosts. One of the most common things that happens at Hampton Court is that this grey ghostly mist hangs above the floors in the kitchens, and this is ectoplasm. And I made a film called Spirit World which discusses ectoplasm, and many of the people that work in the kitchens of Hampton Court, which is, you know, partly opened to the public each day, many people who work in those kitchens have seen this ectoplasm, which is a mist. Hampton Court is a gigantic structure. It's a gigantic royal palace. It's more than 1,000 individual rooms. Now, one of these rooms were recently discovered. I go back now to the time of Henry VIII. Henry VIII's wife, Jane Seymour, she died giving birth to the young Prince Edward. The young prince had a nurse who was called Mrs. Penn, and this is in the 1500s, and she was buried actually inside Hampton Court grounds at the old chapel. But in the 1800s, that chapel was demolished and her grave was disturbed. And from that moment onwards, workmen kept hearing this kind of constant whirring sound coming from behind a wall in Hampton Court Palace. So eventually a decision was made to actually tear this wall down and find out what was the source of this whirring sound. Well, as soon as they pulled the wall down, the sound stopped. But they found a room, a previously forgotten small room, a small chamber. And inside that chamber was a spinning wheel, exactly the same type of spinning wheel that Mrs. Penn, the nurse of the young Prince Edward, had used when she was alive. It's very rare to see a photo of a ghost where you can see the entire shape of the body. That is extremely rare. It's quite common to see a hand, and obviously it's even more common to sense the feeling that there is a ghost there, but not see anything. And in the so-called Haunted Gallery at Hampton Court, tourists have been punched by poltergeists, which is a term which is used to describe a ghost which has a lot of kinetic power, and it can actually move objects, and it can touch people, and it can punch you. But it's very, very rare to have a ghost who has telekinetic power, can actually move physical objects, and at the same time is actually visible. Now, in October 2003, a very, very strange incident occurred. On the first day, alarms went off in a part of Hampton Court which is used for exhibitions. And these alarms are linked to fire escape doors. And it was about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, and guards went down and they found these doors open. There was nobody there. And so they just closed the doors. Well, the next day, the same thing happened. At the same time, about 1 p.m. lunchtime. This is in full daylight. And the closed-circuit TV cameras really picked up something that was, to my experience, totally unique in terms of footage that you usually see of ghosts. The footage wasn't released to the public for 2 months. It came to be in the public domain in December 2003. It makes me wonder what was going on for 2 months with people, I dare say, analysing this footage. If that is a ghost, I have to say, having made a full-on feature-length documentary called Spirit World, all about spirits and ectoplasm and electronic voice phenomena and hauntings, I have to say that this piece of footage from Hampton Court Palace, if that is a ghost, is the world's singular most incredible piece of ghost footage. This person, or this figure, is displaying tremendous power to make those doors fly open and then to slam them shut with such force that one of the doors actually bounces back open again. If it is a ghost, then we're dealing with a full physical apparition, and a ghost which has got poltergeist strength in its spirit. It takes a huge amount of energy for a spirit to manifest itself into a visible form. And then it takes a huge amount of extra effort for it to then interact with physical objects. This is why poltergeists are usually only sensed, and only the objects which they move are seen by witnesses. The actual poltergeist itself is rarely ever seen. Well, the other question, of course, is could this just be a person? Now, there are tour guides at Hampton Court Palace who dress in period costumes, and I visited the palace in the winter of 2004. I got there and it was fairly dark, but they were still doing these tours with the tour guides dressed in traditional costume holding lanterns. Now, the costumes which I saw bear no resemblance to the clothes which this strange character is seen wearing. In actual fact, the robes which the figure is wearing are really the kinds of robes that an alchemist or a magician of the 16th century or of the medieval era, somebody like Agrippa or Abraham the Jew, these magicians wore robes exactly like we see in the video footage from the closed-circuit TV camera. My conclusion so far is not really made. What I would say at this point is that 4 years have passed. If this was a tour guide or it was somebody having a practical joke at the palace, there's been more than enough time for that to come to light. If it's a ghost, then this is the most remarkable ghost footage ever. If it's a person, then this is obviously a person who wants privacy. They're slamming those doors closed. Their demeanour, their movements suggest that they are in a huff. They're in a, you know, there's no time to lose, slam those doors, get back inside kind of attitude. Now, of course, there is one other possible hypothesis, and that goes back to the research which was exposed by David Icke in The Biggest Secret, where he quotes the sources, people who say that they had attended rituals at royal palaces. And Hampton Court is one of these places which is steeped in the history of the royal bloodline of Great Britain. There is no question that at the time of Henry VIII, murder by magic was accepted as fact by the nobility, the aristocracy, and the royalty. There was a famous case involving a witch, a woman who was accused of witchcraft. Her name was Mabel Brigg. This is during the life of Henry VIII, and she was arrested under the suspicion that she tried to kill Henry VIII using witchcraft. Well, the fact that the order was sent out to arrest her is proof enough that the royals have, throughout the ages, taken magic and magical ritual and spells very, very, very seriously indeed. So, this could be somebody, a person, dressed as a medieval magician, dressed in actual fact in the same kind of robes that are described by the eyewitnesses that supplied information to David Icke for his book The Biggest Secret. This could be a person who's partaking in a magical ritual which is taking place inside a royal palace. And this is exactly the scenario which is described in the book by David Icke.
It's no accident that the Queen's, present Queen's grandmother is a direct descendant from the sister of Vlad Dracul, on whom the Dracula stories are named. Based. So Diana knew this, and then I come across people like an American lady, Arizona Wilder, who again was involved in a victim of this mind control project and was used to conduct rituals for them. Under a mind-controlled state, they are mind-controlled to conduct these rituals in a certain way.
And these were taking place on royal properties in Scotland?
Yes, exactly, in Balmoral, and there's a particular place in Belgium which is known as the Mothers of Darkness Castle, which is funnily located in the same area that child murder and satanic ring was based that came to light clearly involving the establishment figures of Belgium and was a massive cover-up. When a real investigator, prosecutor, got involved, of course, they had to get rid of him, and 300,000 Belgians went on the march one day in protest at the cover-up. Well, all these things interconnect. And she told me that she and another two of such people have told me the same story, that she was actually in Britain at rituals at which Diana was being abused in part of these rituals in a mind-controlled state, because there's no question whatsoever that when you talk to the people I've talked to, that Princess Diana was one of the victims of mind control. One of the things that they do is they mind control the children of the aristocratic families, again for a reason we've discussed, which is the Illuminati mind, which is different to the regular run of human mind. It cannot stand the thought that it's not controlling events. Therefore, it does not want cuckoos in the bloodline nest. Therefore, it makes sure that the kids undergo mind control from an early age, which is why so many of these aristocratic families are so bloody dysfunctional, because they're all kind of, had their minds played with.
They're bred from birth to serve a role.
Exactly. Diana's role, and I'm not kidding, from birth, would have been to have been sacrificed in that place at that time. And people, and I understand, will find that staggering and impossible to believe. Well, you should have been around me for the last 14 years, and it wouldn't be impossible to believe. And her other role was to had her genes to the Windsors, because if we want to get really bizarre, the Windsors are not, like these Illuminati bloodlines in general, are not the same DNA as the rest of the global population. They need an infusion of human genetics to hold the balance of their DNA between the human and what they really are, which is actually not human as we understand human. And what was happening, as Christine Fitzgerald, this close confidant of Diana for 9 years, explained to me, was that the genes of the Windsors were getting too imbalanced to the non-human side. And it was going to become clear within a very few generations that they weren't all that they seemed to be. And what they needed was an infusion of human genes. And as I've written in my books for years, and so many insiders have told me, and others, the key genetics that these people like to interbreed with are blonde-haired, blue-eyed people. Now, where did I hear that before? Oh yes, Hitler's master race. And they want to preserve this master race because they need to keep interbreeding with that genetics. So, yeah, exactly.
Those traits with the Spencer family.
Exactly. So what happens? They bring Diana in. What does Diana say in her accounts that she allowed to be published in various books? That once the children were born, Charles basically was saying to her, that's it.
It seems to me that if anyone should have come under intense media scrutiny, it should have been Prince Philip for having his links with the Profumo affair, or it should have been the Queen, where one of her close relatives was a KGB agent. But that never happened. In all the research I've done about European monarchs, I've never been able to find a single monarch in recent times that's had a full-time job. When you analyse what they do, what takes up their time in terms of the royal diary is really patronising military organisations such as retired veteran organisations. The Chelsea Pensioners Club is a good example. And of course the military are there as Her Majesty's military services to protect the monarchy and to defend the realm. Military officers swear obedience to protect Queen and country or King and country. They don't swear allegiance to protect the British public. Now Diana was completely different. Diana took on her royal duties with a lot more care and a lot more compassion than any other royal person that I've researched throughout all the articles I've written and the films I've made that concern royal subjects. I have to say that Diana was the only royal person to really embrace, literally embrace, people who were suffering from leprosy, AIDS. She used to take her children to shelters where women who'd been battered by their husbands were given refuge. She used to take the young princes out onto the streets and show them what life was like for homeless people. On several foreign visits, Diana used to request that she could meet with children in hospitals suffering from illnesses, and children who'd suffered loss of limbs through landmines and this kind of thing. And on more than one occasion, Diana was seen crying and showing real empathy with those children. And this really brought her into the collective bosom of everyone on the planet. She was the world's most photographed woman. She was a member of what can only be described as the richest royal dynasty the world has ever known. And here she was, crying openly, meeting children in third world countries, and really showing a great deal of empathy. I've never ever come across any other royal person that did that. And this, I feel, reading between the lines and not really being able to find a single newspaper cutting that shows any support for Diana from any other member of the royal family. This, I think, showed that Diana had real feelings for real people, and that this put her at odds with major senior members of the royal family such as Prince Philip and the Queen. She brought her children up in a atmosphere of complete family love, and I don't think it's overstating the case to say that many of the royal children throughout history have grown up in an atmosphere which has not been compassionate. It hasn't been a family-loving situation. And I suspect that all of this really alienated Diana from the senior royals. And by his own admission, when the relationship with Diana had broken down after the young princes had been born, through his own admission on a documentary which was made, Prince Charles then returned to his true love, and it is true that he's had a powerful, sexual, emotional, loving relationship with Camilla Parker Bowles, regardless of the fact that she was actually married to Andrew Parker Bowles. What transpired, according to the book which was written by Andrew Morton, called Diana, Her True Story, is that all of this good work, all of this compassion, all of this loving empathy which Diana displayed, led her to be ostracized by the royal family. It seems to me that the more that she cared, and the more that she wore her heart on her sleeve, and the more that she showed that she had great respect for people like Mother Teresa, the more the royal family tried to ignore her. It's one thing being successful in the public eye, as she was with all of her charity work. It's quite another thing to be a failure in the eyes of the senior royals when you're at home with them. And I think that this dichotomy created an inattention with Diana and a dis-ease with the royal family. And dis-ease causes stress and tension, and dis-ease is actually disease. And according to the book by Andrew Morton, Diana used to suffer from bulimia. And bulimia is a very, very serious disorder, as is anorexia. And all credit to Diana, she actually publicly admitted that via the Andrew Morton book, and she fought through it, and she started on a regime of exercise. At the time when she was murdered, she was really very, very physically fit, and she used to visit the gym every day, and she worked her way through this disorder, and she worked her way through the ostracization that she suffered at the hands of the royal family. If we consider all of these pressures that were on Diana, we can see that she was somehow caught in a marriage which was a marriage without love between her and Charles. She was in a marriage where Charles's parents considered her as somebody that was maybe perhaps losing it mentally. And rumours were circulating that Diana was mentally unstable.
I'm supposed to be dragged off in a minute with men in white coats, so if it's all right with you, I thought I might postpone my nervous breakdown to a more appropriate moment.
And all I can say is that, those rumours probably exasperated her eating disabilities. And according to the confessional parts of Andrew Morton's book, not a single member of the royal family offered her any help whatsoever. She did have a close relationship with Barry Manicky, who was a personal protection officer. And I know that an American television company made a documentary claiming that Diana and Barry Manicky had had more than just a close friendship, that they actually had an affair. Shortly after this broadcast, which I believe was broadcast in America, Barry Manicky was killed in a car accident. She came to the point where she wanted to go through the process of writing this down, and her cathartic process led to the publication of an entire book, which was ghostwritten for Diana by Andrew Morton. And transcripts were smuggled out of Kensington Palace, and her butler, her loyal butler, Paul Burrell, actually writes in his book, which is called A Royal Duty, how there were these clandestine deliveries of transcripts of passages of the book, which was published under the title Diana, Her True Story, and these transcripts were smuggled out in their shopping basket on a bicycle. Now, the publication of that book, I feel that it must have been the last nail in the coffin for Diana. From that point onwards, I suspect that there was a war, an emotional, economic, marital war that was taking place behind closed doors at Kensington Palace and at Buckingham Palace and at Highgrove, which is the country residence of Prince Charles. Just a few months after the Andrew Morton book had been published, an audio tape recording surfaced in the tabloid press. And these tapes famously became known as the Diana Gate tapes, which is a reference to Watergate, which is the scandal uncovered by two reporters for the Washington Post that eventually brought down the Nixon administration in America. So they called these audio recordings of Diana's telephone conversations the Diana Gate tapes. Now, I've gone through the transcripts of these tapes very carefully that were published in the tabloid press at the time. And it seems that the conversation was between Diana and a gentleman called Mr. Ogilvy. Now, what's interesting is that when you read the actual substance of what was said, and then you read what the tabloid Fleet Street editors surmised from those conversations, the two things are completely different. The tabloid editors sensationalized the situation and made out that Diana was actually having some rampant love affair with Mr. Ogilvy. And as far as I'm aware, that was not clearly the case. Now, every member of the royal family actually has a secret code word. They have a code name. And, you know, this is useful because obviously you don't want terrorists finding out that, say, for example, Prince Charles or the Queen is actually going to go and visit a certain place. So the code name for the Queen would be used in telephone conversations, and these code names are used as nicknames within the palaces. And this is confirmed by Paul Burrell, who actually worked for the senior royals before he ended up becoming the butler for Princess Diana. The Diana Gate tape does show that Mr. Mr. Gilby is his name. Sorry about that. It's not Ogilvy, it's Gilby. Mr. Gilby used a term, the word squidgy. Squidgy was a term which was used by him to refer to Diana in the tapes. Well, if you read the transcript, it seems to me that it's not, automatically, just because he's used the word squidgy, it doesn't automatically mean that Diana was being unfaithful. It doesn't automatically mean that there was some rampant love affair. They were close friends and they had nicknames for each other. But the Diana Gate tapes were deliberately circulated into the tabloid media to make Diana look as if she was unfaithful. And those tapes must have been recorded by the intelligence services or somebody who had bugged Princess Diana's apartments at Kensington Palace. And after these taped conversations appeared in the press, Diana would actually put on a disguise. She'd put on a headscarf and glasses, and she would actually go to the local high street in Kensington, and she would make phone calls using public telephone boxes, because she was certain that Her Majesty's intelligence services were actually bugging her phone, and the fact that these conversations, these private telephone conversations between Diana and Mr. Gilby came to light in the press proves that Diana was not paranoid. She was not hallucinating. She wasn't a victim of wild speculation. It proves that people really were spying on Diana. The tapes were obviously recorded by a member of Her Majesty's Secret Services. They were the only people that would have had access to Princess Diana's private telephone line. And we can see from the glum expressions during the trip to Korea that the marriage had been destroyed. It had been destroyed by spies.
I wish to inform the House that Buckingham Palace are at this moment issuing the following statement. It reads as follows. It is announced from Buckingham Palace that, with regret, the Prince and Princess of Wales have decided to separate.
Now, after the bulimia and the ostracisation from the royal family and, the various pressures that had been put on Diana by the media, a lesser person would have been crushed and would have probably faded completely away. But Diana actually proved that she was made of good, solid British upper lip material, and she basically became even more famous, if that could be possible. She travelled around to many different hospices, visiting people with AIDS, other various diseases. She really, she knew that she was the mother of the future King of England, and rather than going away in a hole and disappearing, which is what I'm sure the senior royals wanted her to do, Diana, you know, she blossomed. She blossomed incredibly and became, I think, every single person's ideal princess.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have it on very good authority that the quest for perfection our society demands can leave the individual gasping for breath at every turn. From early childhood, many had felt they were expected to be perfect, but didn't feel they had the right to express their true feelings to those around them. Feelings of guilt, of self-revulsion, and low personal esteem, creating in them a compulsion to dissolve like a disprin and disappear.
And she was using her charisma and the worldwide media attention to bring a focus on subjects which the royal family, I'm sure, were very annoyed to be brought into the public spotlight. And one of those things was her campaign against the landmines. Very huge corporations are involved in the landmine manufacturing business, and the landmine clearing industry. And it's no secret that throughout history, the investment portfolio of various royals have included investments in companies that manufacture landmines, guns and weapons. What then transpired is, after Diana had become even more famous through all these public engagements, is that somebody, obviously with Diana's best interests at heart, somebody who I suspect was working for MI5, the internal intelligence service of Her Majesty's government, actually gave the tabloid media a recorded conversation between Prince Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles.
Scandalous, explicit, a right royal shocker. The Charles and Camilla...
It became known as the Tampax tape because at one point the person who seemingly seems to be Prince Charles in these audio recordings says, I wish I was a Tampax, meaning I wish I was, you know, inserted into your vagina. And obviously this created an immense amount of media interest in the relationship between Prince Charles and Camilla, and more people, more members of the public became aware that Camilla had been a love interest, a passionate love interest of Prince Charles long before Diana was on the scene. And the so-called Tampax tape with Charles and Camilla just exasperated the situation. What then happened after Diana had decided to take a back seat and be so much in the public eye, which is what she wanted. The tabloid media turned their attentions to Camilla Parker Bowles, and all of a sudden the public were informed in more detail about her marriage to Andrew Parker Bowles and the longevity of the relationship, the loving relationship that Camilla Parker Bowles had had with Prince Charles. And it's very, very sad, because Camilla Parker Bowles, shortly before the car crash in Paris that killed Princess Diana, shortly before then, Camilla Parker Bowles was herself involved in a traffic accident in the West Country, near a house in Wiltshire, in England. And it's still an interesting thing. We must cover that in this film, because the car collided and Camilla Parker Bowles fled the scene. Now, there is a law in most countries in Europe that if you're involved in a car accident and there's another person who's been injured, you mustn't leave the scene. You mustn't. You have every responsibility to stay at the scene, call the emergency services if you can. And she fled and she ran into the woods. And I've heard rumours, I don't know whether this is speculation or whatever, but there were rumours that she'd fled into the woods because she felt that she might have been killed, and that possibly that the car crash was actually an orchestrated event. Prince Charles's demeanour and his actions had not been portrayed in a favourable light in the book that had been written by Andrew Morton. And the Dimbleby interview with Prince Charles was designed, I feel, to really put Prince Charles's side of the story across. But on the date that the Dimbleby interview with Prince Charles was broadcast on British television, there was a public function that Diana had been invited to, and she appeared in a fantastic black evening gown and absolutely stunned the world's media, and in a way diffused and took away a lot of public attention away from the broadcast, which I'm sure was designed to rebuild Prince Charles's public image.
Silly Productions present a horror film.
I'll get my own back on him if it's the last thing I do. Yes, I will!
Now, this idea of making a special interview program, which is what Prince Charles had done with one of the Dimbleby brothers, was copied by Diana, and Prince Charles had set the precedent to wear his heart on his sleeve in a publicly broadcast interview, And Diana basically thought, well, if Prince Charles is going to do that and try and put his side of the story using television, then I shall do the same thing. And what transpired, this is very, very shortly before Diana was murdered, is that the BBC's flagship current affairs weekly program called Panorama showed an incredibly honest and in-depth interview with Diana. Now, in this Panorama interview with Diana, she stated that she would really like to help Great Britain by using her public image to go abroad and support, you know, the work of British charities as some form of ambassador. And that would, if you could imagine such a thing, it would make her even more famous, and that's exactly what she went and did. After the Panorama broadcast, the months leading up to her murder, Princess Diana really stepped up her campaign against landmines, and she visited war zones, ex-war war zones, and for the first time, people on the street really understood the damage, the horrendous emotional and physical horror of landmines. Diana met with Muslim people. She hugged and kissed children of the third world again, which is what she'd done in the past. But this time it was an exercise where she was really using her will, she was using her worldwide public profile to damage the landmine industry, which is worth hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds. A landmine can be purchased in bulk for as little as £40. Now, estimates vary, but at the moment we believe that there's something like 20 to 30 million landmines in stock in the world. So, you know, the investment is colossal. If you take the average price of £40 per landmine, times £40 by 25 million, you can see that what Diana was trying to do was to try and really alleviate the suffering that landmines caused, and in doing so bring down an industry worth hundreds of millions of pounds.
Madam,
Yes.
just no picture, madam.
In bad weather, during the rush hour in Paris, I took a taxi ride from the tunnel to the hospital where Diana was finally pronounced dead. According to the British inquest held in the autumn of 2007, the exact route which Diana's ambulance took from the scene of the crash to the hospital is unknown. So, I asked my taxi driver to take what, in his experience, was the shortest and most direct route from the tunnel to the hospital. We left the tunnel at 4:06, driving in heavy Parisian rush hour traffic. We took a route through a long underpass. Perhaps these lights were the last images Diana ever saw through the window of the ambulance. Many of these Parisian tunnels are connected to catacombs and other tunnels which traverse the whole of Paris. Along the bank of the Seine, Diana's ambulance travelled, flanked by police motorcycles. According to a Guardian newspaper article published on Wednesday, November the 14th, 2007, the on-board doctor was Jean-Marc Martineau. The ambulance driver's name was Michel Massaboeuf, who claims that the doctor instructed him to drive extra slow because of the condition of the princess. The driver, Michel Massaboeuf, confirms that the ambulance had an escort of several police motorcyclists. Michel Massaboeuf claims that the average speed of the ambulance during the journey was 40 to 50 kilometers per hour. That's approximately 25 to 30 miles per hour. This is approximately the same average speed my taxi travelled from the tunnel to the hospital. Into another underpass, and we quickly make our way to the Petit-Salpêtrière Hospital. which is situated near Gare Austerlitz. At 17 minutes past 4, my taxi arrives in the boulevard of the hospital. My journey, in rush hour traffic, during bad weather, with no police escort, has taken just 11 minutes. Diana's ambulance took more than 1 hour and 40 minutes to do the same journey. According to the ambulance driver, he was ordered by the doctor in the back of the ambulance to stop and park outside the gardens of a natural history museum because Diana was in a critical condition. The ambulance driver claims they parked for just 5 minutes. The hospital entrance, where professional emergency staff had all the latest equipment standing by to help Diana, was actually in view of the parked ambulance. In fact, you can walk from the hospital entrance to the place where the ambulance parked in less than 2 minutes. But no one from the hospital rushed over to the ambulance, even though the place where the ambulance was parked was directly opposite the entrance to the hospital. Why did an 11-minute journey take nearly 2 hours? Mathematically speaking, this means that the ambulance travelled an average of just 2 miles per hour for 1 hour and 40 minutes. Have you ever seen an ambulance travelling at 2 miles per hour with an injured person on board? No witness has come forward confirming that they saw the ambulance and police motorbikes crawling along the road at 2 miles per hour. At such a ridiculously slow average speed, one would expect the exact route to be burned into the memory of the driver. However, Lord Justice Scott Baker told jurors in the British inquest during the autumn of 2007 that the exact route of the ambulance was not known. Here's a question. If you drove at an average speed of just 2 miles per hour on a journey of just a few miles, would you remember the roads which you drove down? Many authors have speculated that it is during this ambulance journey that someone killed Diana, by either refusing her medical attention and literally watching her die in an ambulance parked up on the side of the road, or someone with truly evil intentions made Diana's injuries even worse, possibly cutting and slicing her organs. Out of the sight of the press and the police, out of the sight of the general public, in a long underground underpass, dimly lit, in the privacy of the back of an ambulance, the most famous person in the world was murdered. Once admitted to the hospital, Diana was soon pronounced dead. Then, almost immediately, and against all French laws, a team of embalmers immediately embalmed Diana's body. This makes any post-mortem autopsy difficult to perform. At the same time Diana's body was being illegally embalmed, the tunnel was washed. Yes, The scene of the most notorious traffic accident of all time, which killed the world's most famous person, was washed down and opened for public use within just a couple of hours of the crash. The scene of the crime was cleansed. The most important body embalmed whilst still warm, and the body of Dodi al-Fayed was burnt, all within 24 hours of the crash. History repeats itself. During this investigation, I asked myself, is there a former historical precedent of a princess being killed in a fake car crash? Surprisingly, I found yes, there is a historical precedent of a princess being killed in a fake car accident, and it also happened in France. On September the 13th, 1982, Princess Grace and Princess Stephanie of Monaco were involved in a terrible car accident. Their rover careered and veered off the winding roads of France, leading to the Principality of Monaco. They were travelling from Roc-Argel to Monaco. Princess Grace was driving. A driver who was following them said that all of a sudden the car carrying the two princesses swerved and zigzagged. Princess Stephanie was able to get out of the car when it finally stopped rolling, and she suffered a few injuries. However, her mother, Princess Grace of Monaco, wasn't so lucky. Princess Grace was found unconscious inside the car. Some people that lived near the site of the accident rescued and took Princess Grace out of the vehicle. An ambulance came and took the princess to the Central Hospital in Monaco. Princess Grace went through a series of studies and a CAT scan. Due to her condition, doctors said nothing else could be done, and her life support system was terminated. On the night of September the 14th, 1982, Princess Grace of Monaco, formerly the American actress Grace Kelly, died. Some authors alleged that this was an act of medical euthanasia or even medical homicide. "15 years after the life support systems of Princess Grace were terminated, a man calling himself Georges Leroux came forward. He alleged that Princess Grace was initiated into a secret society called the Order of the Solar Temple on June 15th, 1982, at the Priory of Villers-Morgon in the south of France. In 1997, a television documentary alleged that Princess Grace of Monaco was the High Priestess of the Sovereign Order of the Solar Temple. The Sovereign Order of the Solar Temple dates back to the so-called Origine Renaissance. This happened on June 12, 1952, when French esoteric author Jacques Breyer and two companions had a mystical experience. They claimed they were contacted by secret masters of the temple and asked to establish a new Templar Renaissance. This new Templar Renaissance eventually materialized as a new French secret society, and this was named the Sovereign Order of the Solar Temple. It was established on June the 24th, 1966, and incorporated under Monaco law in 1967. The French Principality of Monaco was selected by this secret society because the Grand Master, Jean-Louis Marsan, was a Monaco socialite and friend of Princess Grace of Monaco. According to various TV documentaries, there was more than one version of the Sovereign Order of the Solar Temple. Princess Grace of Monaco gave millions and millions of dollars to the Solar Temple. However, she soon became disillusioned with the teachings of this secret society. The Sovereign Order of the Solar Temple was eventually led by a man called de Membro. Monsieur de Membro convinced his recruits that he was in touch with 33 spiritual masters who watched over the whole world from a base in the Himalayas. He also told the followers of the Sovereign Order of the Solar Temple that they were reincarnated from biblical figures or saints. Princess Grace of Monaco was asked to donate $10 million to the Sovereign Order of the Solar Temple. She paid them $9 million, but soon had second thoughts about paying the rest. A schism broke out amongst the leadership of the Sovereign Order of the Solar Temple. Shortly after, Princess Grace of Monaco was involved in a mysterious car accident in France and died in hospital. After Princess Grace of Monaco's life support system was turned off, her body was laid out in the palace chapel, and mourners from all over the world visited to pay their respects. Sent on her first ever public engagement, representing the British royal family alone, a young British teenage girl stared into the face of the dead Princess Grace of Monaco. She was staring at a princess who had been killed by a car crash in mysterious circumstances. That young British teenage girl was Diana, who, 15 years later, would also be a princess who would die in a car crash in mysterious circumstances in France.